There is a wall buried beneath South Florida that most people have never heard of. It runs along 17 miles of perimeter, buried up to 60 feet below the surface, and it exists for one reason: to keep a $3.9 billion reservoir from disappearing into the ground. This is what it takes to save South Florida from itself. To understand what South Florida needs saving from, you have to go back 100 years. Lake Okeechobee sits at the center of southern Florida like an enormous bathtub. When heavy rains fill it past a certain level, engineers open the valves. For a century, those valves have pointed east and west toward the Caloosahatchee River on the Gulf side and the St. Lucie River on the Atlantic side. That water carries agricultural nutrients with it. When it hits the coast, it feeds massive toxic algae blooms. In the summer of 2018, those blooms triggered a state of emergency across multiple counties. Beaches shut down. Fish died by the thousands. Charter fishing captains watched entire seasons collapse, and tourism revenues collapsed with them in communities that depend completely on clean water. Meanwhile, the Everglades, the river of grass that once received a slow, steady sheet of water from the north, now gets a fraction of what it used to. The ecosystem is degrading. Invasive species are spreading. The food web is unraveling piece by piece. Then there is the drinking water problem, which does not get talked about nearly enough. Approximately 5 million people in southeastern Florida get their drinking water from the Biscayne Aquifer. That aquifer is recharged by water seeping down through the Everglades. Less water flowing south means less recharge, and as sea levels rise, salt water pushes further inland into that same fresh water supply. Three crises, all connected, all caused by the same century-old decision to move water away instead of holding it. The project designed to fix all of this sits directly south of Lake Okeechobee in a region called the Everglades Agricultural Area, 1,160 square miles of former wetland, drained and converted to sugarcane fields during the 20th century. Those fields are now being converted back into a water management system. The concept is simple: capture excess Lake Okeechobee water, hold it, clean it, then release it south toward the Everglades and Florida Bay. The project covers 17,000 acres in total, bigger than the island of Manhattan. It has two major components. The reservoir itself covers 10,500 acres and can store 78 billion gallons of water. Right next to it sits the stormwater treatment area, 6,500 acres of engineered wetland where water is cleaned before it enters the protected Everglades. These two pieces together form the largest single component of the largest wetland restoration effort in American history. The way this system cleans water is straightforward once you understand it, but the engineering precision it requires is anything but simple. Water gets pulled from Lake Okeechobee into the reservoir through the inflow pump station, which has 9 pumps capable of moving 3 billion gallons per day. The reservoir holds that water until conditions are right for release south. When the time comes, the water flows into the treatment wetland. That is where the cleaning happens. Inside the treatment marsh, aquatic plants absorb phosphorus from the water column as it moves slowly through. When those plants die and settle to the bottom, the phosphorus gets buried in the sediment and removed from the water permanently. Why does that matter? Florida law requires that water entering the protected Everglades contain no more than 10 parts per billion of phosphorus. To put that in perspective, that is roughly 10 drops of ink dissolved in a backyard swimming pool. The treatment area must hit that target before a single drop goes south. That is why 6,500 acres are needed just for filtration, not storage, just cleaning. Building a reservoir in Florida is a fundamentally different engineering problem than building one almost anywhere else. Most of the state sits on porous limestone, the same rock formation responsible for Florida's famous natural springs and sinkholes. Water does not stay still on this geology. It moves laterally and vertically through the rock and sediment like a sponge. And a reservoir of this scale, without serious intervention, would lose enormous quantities of water underground while flooding adjacent farmland through subsurface pressure. The solution is buried underground, running the entire perimeter of the reservoir. engineers installed a continuous barrier wall, 17.3 miles long, trenched between 35 and 60 feet below the surface. It's made of soil, cement, and bentonite, materials chosen for their low permeability, creating an underground dam that blocks lateral water movement down to more solid rock layers that act as a natural floor. At 17.3 miles, it is one of the largest underground cutoff walls ever built for a freshwater reservoir in the United States. That wall is invisible. Once construction is complete, there will be nothing to see, just a reservoir that holds water in a state that was never supposed to hold it. Above ground, the numbers are significant on their own. 17 million cubic yards of earth were excavated and placed in compacted layers to form the embankment. The finished walls rise 37 feet above the flat South Florida terrain, with a maximum water depth inside of 23 feet. A structural failure at that height and volume would be catastrophic for the surrounding region. On the treatment wetlands side, 6,500 acres of former sugarcane field were reshaped into a series of wetland cells. Construction began in April of 2020. By January of 2024, the state of Florida completed the treatment area and began filling the first cell. Connecting it all is Contract 10A, an 8.3-mile inflow and outflow canal with a capacity of 3,000 cubic feet per second, plus a seepage canal along the northern boundary to capture any groundwater that escapes around the barrier wall. That component was completed at a ribbon-cutting ceremony on September 23, 2025. The EAA reservoir was first authorized in the year 2000 as part of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan. By the time construction broke ground in February of 2023, the projected completion date was 2034, 34 years from authorization to finish line. For the most critical piece of Everglades restoration, that timeline was a serious problem. The delays came from federal permitting layers, funding cycles, and the complexity of coordinating between state agencies and the Army Corps on a project of this scale. Then, in July of 2025, the state and the Army Corps reached a landmark agreement. Florida assumed construction authority for several key components, including the inflow pump station and the Blue Shanty Flowway, the component designed to remove the last physical barrier between the reservoir and Everglades National Park, stripping away the federal procedural layers, creating delays on those elements. The timeline compressed from 2034 to 2029, 5 years cut from the schedule. The Blue Shanty Flowway became the first federal project component in SERP history to transfer to state leadership. That $3.9 billion price tag is split 50-50 between state and federal funding. Under Governor DeSantis, Florida has invested nearly $8 billion in Everglades restoration broadly since 2019. But as of early 2026, questions remain. Advocacy groups and legal organizations have raised concerns about whether the accelerated timeline might reduce public oversight, since some components previously subject to federal environmental review could now move forward under state authority without those same checks. There was also a very real physical threat that came to a head in February of 2026. A proposal by US Sugar and a contractor called Phillips & Jordan to blast an 8,000-acre industrial rock mine just 1,000 feet from the reservoir had been moving through approvals for over a year. The Army Corps raised formal concerns about seepage risks. Scientists warned that the consequences of blasting that close to the barrier wall could be permanent. On February 20th, 2026, a legal settlement scaled the mine's active mining area back to roughly 1,300 acres. The threat was contained, but the episode revealed how many ways a project this complex can be endangered. When the project is fully operational, the projections are meaningful. For Florida's coasts, models project a 55% reduction in harmful discharges into the Caloosahatchee estuary, though that figure assumes every other authorized Everglades project is also complete and running alongside it. Think back to that 2018 state of emergency. The fish kills, the beach closures, the fishing seasons that did not happen. A 55% reduction in those discharges changes the baseline in a way no emergency response ever could. And for the fishing captains who watched entire seasons disappear in 2018, it would mean the difference between a career and a memory. For the Everglades, the system is designed to deliver up to 370,000 acre-feet of water annually to the Everglades and Florida Bay combined. Water managers call this new water because it would otherwise have been discharged to the coasts and lost forever. The reservoir alone cannot complete that journey south. Water flowing toward Everglades National Park hits a physical barrier most people have never heard of: the Tamiami Trail, a road built in the 1920s running east-west across the bottom of the Florida Peninsula. For nearly a century, it's acted like a dam across the slow, wide sheet of water that once moved naturally across the landscape into the park. The Blue Shanty Flowway addresses this. 10 miles of earthen berm along the Tamiami Trail are being removed, and 8.5 miles of new levee are being constructed to channel restored flow into the park and toward Florida Bay. Without that component, the reservoir's water has nowhere to go. For the 5 million people depending on the Biscayne Aquifer, models project the restored southward flow would meaningfully slow saltwater intrusion, though by how much depends entirely on how quickly the full system comes online. Here is where things get honest. The delivery projections, including up to 470 billion gallons annually to the Everglades and Florida Bay combined, are modeled numbers. They depend on every single component operating as designed: the reservoir, the treatment wetland, the pump station, the Contract 10A canal, the Blue Shanty Flowway, and the downstream flow network. Nobody has ever operated all of that together. The system will not be testable until 2029 if that deadline holds. Open questions remain as of early 2026. Will federal reimbursements flow to the state as planned? Will the accelerated pace introduce engineering risks that a slower review process could have caught? Conservation organizations have already called for stronger public accountability as construction enters its most critical phase. The existing infrastructure was never designed for this. The canals that drain east and west, the coastal control structures, the pump stations built to move water away from the lake, all of it operates under a logic this project is now trying to reverse. The EAA reservoir does not replace that system. It operates inside it, adding a southward redirect while the drainage network around it remains fully active. Managing both simultaneously, in the same watershed, in real time, is not a solved problem. Whether those two approaches can coexist in the same plumbing network over decades is the question the next generation of engineers will have to answer. The EAA reservoir is, depending on how you look at it, either an admission or a demonstration. An admission that the 20th century approach to South Florida's water broke something genuinely difficult to fix. A demonstration that large-scale ecological restoration is possible. The South Florida Water Management District has called this reservoir its crown jewel, and as of today, it is still under construction. So here is the question we want to hear your take on. Do you think a project this complex, built by the same engineering tradition that caused the damage in the first place, can genuinely restore the Everglades? Or is this just patching a wound that runs too deep? Drop your answer in the comments below. Thank you for watching it, and make sure to subscribe for more Mega Build stories.